Mercaris is the nation's leading market information service for organic and non-GMO agricultural commodities. At Mercaris.com, you can find up-to-date information on market conditions for organic and non-GMO commodities, including import and export, acreage and production estimates, and timely commodity pricing information. Visit Mercaris.com now for more information. Or for agricultural producers, visit Mercaris.com/farmer to sign up for Mercaris' free farmer plan.
This is Ryan Koory, the Director of Economics with Mercaris, here with your monthly market and outlook update. Checking in on the pace of harvest this year, looking at both corn and soybeans, organic corn and soybeans within the U.S. Both markets look like they're in pretty good shape. Looking at the pace of harvest, the U.S. organic soybean harvest is looking really good right now, about a week ahead of the 5-year average, and has been picking up steam over the past week, really helped out by some dry weather conditions. If we look at how we're doing compared to last year, the pace of organic soybean harvest is about 2 weeks faster than it was in 2019, and we'll likely see that gap increase over the next weeks as the weather outlook continues to look favorable for harvest. Looking at the quality of the organic soybeans in the United States, there are a few states where we see some challenges, namely Iowa, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, and the Dakotas. If you kind of parse what's going on there in Iowa and Nebraska and the Dakotas, there's been some dry weather conditions that have been some issues. And then looking at Pennsylvania, it's been a mixed bag between too much moisture and not enough moisture, just depending where you are. And so in those states, we're expecting to maybe see some less favorable yields relative to the rest of the United States, but still better than where we were last year. Looking overall at the crop condition outlook, they were about even with the 5-year average for organic soybeans. And that's up about 10% from last year. So, we're looking at a pretty good crop coming off this year. Looking at organic corn, the pace of harvest is pretty much in line with the 5-year average at about 32% complete nationally, which again puts us about 2 weeks ahead of the 2019 harvest. And like we talked about in soybeans, we've seen that pace increase over the past week. And with dry weather on the horizon, we're likely to see that gap over last year continue to expand as we look at the rest of October. In terms of quality, we're estimating that organic corn is about 61% rated good to excellent, which is a bit lower than the 5-year average, but up near the 5% from last year. And if we take all of this into perspective, we don't really see much that leads us to change our outlook for yields and production relative to what we talked about last month. Overall, the yield outlook has held really stable since about mid-August, whenever the derecho cut across the U.S. Corn Belt and knocked down some yield expectations as a result. But generally speaking, we're still looking at generally higher yields this year with the possibility of some truly phenomenal organic soybean yields.
Now, Ryan, when you're talking about quality, crop quality, is that referring to the end product, or is that just referring to how it's standing in the field?
Yeah, when we're talking about crop quality, we're talking both about the end product and really we're talking about what we think yields may be. What we do to come up with a crop quality number is we try to piggyback a little bit off of what the USDA does for the conventional sector. The USDA does a variety of different surveys in which they assess the percentage of the crop that's rated at various levels, from poor to good to excellent. And within that, we don't have the same level of survey material that the USDA does for the conventional sector, unfortunately. But there's a lot that you can learn by looking at the data and the research that's out there for conventional sectors. What we do to come up with that number is we look at the rating of good to excellent crop quality that's reported by the USDA for those states, number one. We also look at the drought monitor for various states and various regions, as well as weather outlooks for various states and various regions. And then we read crop reports regionally and statewide to get an idea of what's going on with crops. And the reason you can kind of do that is, a lot of the things that impact conventional crop production also impact organic. Dry weather tends to cut yields. Too much wet weather tends to cut yields. Perfect weather tends to make for better yields. But the one thing we do know and we keep in mind whenever we try to apply what we see in the conventional sector to organics is what's bad for conventional isn't as bad for organic, and what's good for conventional isn't as good for organic. And what I mean by that is if you look at situations in which you have drought conditions, drought conditions tend to weigh pretty heavily on conventionally grown crops. And that's a byproduct of the fact that the soil just doesn't have nearly as much organic matter. And there's less use of things like cover crop. And so dry conditions tend to impact conventional crops pretty harshly. Organic crops, they tend to take a dip, but they don't tend to fall nearly as much as conventional crops under those weather stress conditions. And then conversely, if you look at good weather, good weather is good for all crops, but you definitely see conventional crops perform even better during good weather, favorable weather events. And that's because conventional farmers are allowed to take advantage of a lot more inputs and a lot more things that organic farmers aren't to really, jazz up that corn. It's unlikely you're going to see a 280 bushel organic corn crop, even though, we still pull off some pretty phenomenal yields. So kind of answering your question in a nutshell, I guess, we look at a lot of the same things that the conventional guys do, and we leverage a lot of the insights that are collected for the conventional market, but we weigh them against the reality of the organic market to kind of come up with a perspective of, not just where we think yields are, but how good the quality, things like, test weight and such will be for the crop coming off. So turning to organic livestock, over the month of September, we didn't really see a whole lot of change from what we've been talking about. Looking at USDA reported organic thoroughly inspected broiler slaughter, it did dip seasonally over the month of September. Typically the month of September sees a slowdown in slaughter rates as the end of grilling season approaches. But even with that dip, September organic broiler slaughter did remain up 2% year over year. Looking at the federally reported, USDA reported federal inspected organic turkey slaughter, over September, it had another phenomenal month, up about 155% year over year. And this has been one of those numbers that we've watched over the course of 2020 just, grow phenomenally. And there's, it's one of those things that we're really keeping an eye on so we can kind of understand exactly what's going on with feed demand. And then the last number really kind of talking about coming out of September is organic egg layer inventories. According to USDA estimates, organic cage-free egg layer inventories jumped 9% year over year in September to 17.1 million head. And we tend to see this happen seasonally, and sometimes we see this happen and it persists. We were talking about 15.6 million head, I think, in August, and it jumped to 17.1 million head. So it could be we're seeing a ramp up in production ahead of holiday season, or we could just see further expansion within the industry.
Now back to the turkey slaughter numbers. We did talk about that last month, as you mentioned. But have you noticed in any of the numbers that there is a strong following of new organic turkey farmers that have followed this growth, or what's going on there?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and that's definitely something we've been looking into. With this rate of growth and the sudden increase in organic turkey production, and we've been doing a lot to try to ground truth and understand exactly what's going on within those numbers. And one exercise that we did perform is going back to the OID, the Organic Integrity Database, and looking at the number of certified organic operations producing organic turkeys in the U.S. And looking at that number and taking that as, the number of organic turkey farms in the U.S., really what we see is since about the beginning of 2018, that number has actually stayed pretty steady at 220, 225 within the U.S. It's fluctuated a little bit around that, but not a lot. And so, we're left asking the question, with turkey slaughter in the U.S. increasing, 150% year over year, you're talking, more than double what we were last year, to not see some significant increase in the number of turkey operations in the U.S., it does raise some questions. And so with that, Mercaris being the company that we are definitely champions of market clarity and market information. This is definitely going to be something that we're going to work to add more transparency and add more data around over the next year, really getting a better sense of, what are these organic livestock inventories in the U.S., not just for broilers, but for things, or for turkey rather, but for things like broilers and dairy as well. Because, if you're trying to understand where a market's going, demand is half of what sets price. And if you have no idea what's going on with demand or an unclear picture of what's going on with demand, it makes it extremely difficult to really understand what's going to go on with price and what's driving the market. So turning to trade, looking at organic corn in the U.S., we saw the 2021 marketing year open with lower organic corn imports. One thing that we saw is some trade that we thought we were going to see show up over the month of September was actually officially registered as imported in the month of August. And so that adds to our import expectation for the closed marketing year. But looking at September in general, we saw organic corn and cracked corn imports over the month. We estimate they only reached about 2,000 metric tons, which is down about 87% year over year. Now, in general, September doesn't usually see a huge influx in imports. Typically, at this point in the year, we start to see imports from Argentina pick up, and we did see some imports from Argentina over August. But overall, we're seeing those imports remain pretty low as the marketing year kicks off. Looking at soybean imports, organic soybean imports over the month of September were actually much, much higher, up 61% year over year, reaching their highest level since November 2018. What's most striking about these imports of soybeans is the country of origin continues to shift a little bit. The data that we can watch that gives us that leading expectation of what imports look like for the month of September indicates that these exports were shipped from Turkish ports. And with that, one trend that we've seen over the past marketing year is a reduction in imports from Turkey and an increase in imports from Russia. And so with these exports coming from Turkish ports to the U.S., and the Russian imports that we've been pulling in as well have been coming from Turkish ports. The question is, this huge increase in imports we saw over September, are they actually of Russian origin or are they coming from somewhere else? And so that's something we're going to be watching very closely in November when the official September trade data comes out. And then finally, focusing on organic soybean meal. Soybeans run on a slightly different marketing year. They're an October to September marketing year. So last month brought the close of the soybean meal marketing year. And with that, we saw organic soybean meal imports jump remarkably year over year, up 186% year over year, really breaking a trend that we've seen over the entire 1920 marketing year. Really since October of last year, U.S. organic soybean meal imports have been even to below year-ago levels. In August and July, we saw those numbers pick up a little bit, following the second quarter slowdown in U.S. imports of soybean meal, primarily due to issues with Turkish ports being able to ship things, or not Turkish, rather Indian ports being able to ship out goods. And it's possible that this jump in September, we say, is a continuation of a catch-up from those imports that were suppressed over the middle part of the year. I think one thing to really keep an eye on and to be a little cognizant of is this jump that we saw in September imports, is 43.7 million metric tons that we're talking about. Is that an indicator of what we expect to see over the remainder of this 2021 marketing year, or was September a flash in the pan? I think there's room to see imports of soybean meal move a little bit higher this year relative to last year, but I don't know that we'll see this massive 186% year-over-year gain pace persist over the year to come.
Back to country of origin, Russia is something we talked about last month as well, that we've seen more and more imports coming from that region, and we talk about the Black Sea region in general as well. But question about Russia would be, where do those acres come from, Ryan? All of a sudden, do they just are they able to transition over acres, or is this a long-term plan that they've been working on, or any insight there?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think a little bit of that answer lies in some of the information issues we have within the organic sector. And one of the things that the USDA and the NLP have really been pushing to get through recently is the strengthening of organic enforcement. I think it will help a whole lot with this very question, because the fundamental answer is we just don't really know. There aren't good bits of information in terms of foreign organic production. What we do know is, looking at trade patterns over the past several years, if you take all the Black Sea region countries and include Russia and kind of put them in a basket and look at the imports coming from that basket, those imports have gone up, they've gone down a little bit, but they kind of remain within a constant range. And what we've seen is one Black Sea country kind of falls off, another Black Sea country kind of picks up. And if we look at these imports from Russia, they really started to begin towards the end of last year, end of 2019. Well, with that, the middle part of 2019 saw the NOP revoke the certification authority of CUC Turkey. And with that, a lot of Turkish organic certifications were revoked. Well, following that, these exports continue to come from Black Sea ports, that much, but now the country of origin is Russia. So, it's not clear, did operations switch and are now producing from Russia, or were these originally Russian sourced, or exactly what's going on? It's definitely something worth looking at and keeping an eye on. But also, I think it's important to note that this is one of these issues that will be significantly improved if something like the strengthening of organic enforcement does go through and adds more teeth and more power to agencies like the USDA and the OTA to inspect and to verify the legitimacy of these imports. So finally, closing with some price outlook. Looking at organic corn, since the beginning of October, we saw the 2-week period ending October 3rd, the Mercaris survey recorded price for U.S. delivered organic corn averaged about $6.46 per bushel, which is down more than $1 per bushel from the start of September. Similarly, organic feed grade wheat, we have seen market trading activity pick up at the beginning of this marketing year. But with that increase in market activity, we've seen prices fall lower following corn. The delivered organic feed grade wheat price averaged about $6.35 per bushel over the 2-week period ending October 3rd, which is down about 70 cents per bushel from the start of September. And then looking at organic feed grade soybeans, they continue to hold their ground. They averaged about $2.40 the 2-week period ending October 3rd, which is down about 75 cents from the start of September, but I don't know that that's really an indicator of bearish prices within soybeans because it's still well within that $21 to $20 per bushel range that we keep seeing soybeans reported at, and they've been reported at for most of this past marketing year.
All right, and we've talked about harvest here at the beginning, and it might be a little bit early, but what's your outlook on prices here moving forward?
I think when you look at organic commodity prices, and specifically looking at corn and soybeans, I think you kind of have to split the markets. I don't think you can really talk about them in the same way. And the reason I say that is there's some very different things going on with both supply and demand in those two different markets. If you look at organic corn, it's still true that we import a lot of organic corn. Now, we estimate that over the 1920 marketing year, we imported somewhere around 29% of our organic corn supplies, and that's combining whole and cracked corn. But compared to soybeans, we estimate that number is actually about 78% of supplies, and that's combining soybeans and soybean meal. But that's a pretty big difference in terms of what your fundamental supply drivers are within the market. Corn, we're seeing a continued expansion in acreage and U.S. production, and following that, we're seeing a decline in the reliance on imports. Soybeans, not so much. If we look over the past 4 years, despite the fact that we are seeing growth in U.S. organic soybean production, the share of U.S. supply really hasn't changed. We're still at about 78%, 80% of U.S. supplies are imported. And so what that means is, from a supply perspective, and what really gets to the heart of driving price is, for corn, domestic production matters a lot more. And if you look at a year like the year we're about to have, we are looking at a larger harvest, and we're looking at more organic corn supplies. And will that mean bearish pressure for prices for corn? That really kind of depends on exactly what happens with demand. I like to believe that there's room for corn to get a floor over this fall and maybe hold its ground and not slip too much farther. But really that's predicated on demand. But if you think about soybeans, we are talking about a record, not just a record, but a very large record organic soybean production in the U.S. But that doesn't really mean the same for U.S. organic soybean prices. And it's fundamentally due to the fact that we do import so much more of our supply. And then you pair that with the fact that if you look at what's been driving organic feed demand growth in the United States over the past few years, it's really been expansion in poultry production. And with that, organic poultry eats a higher percentage of protein in its diet relative to ruminant animals or dairy. And so with more organic poultry production, we've seen demand growth for meals and for protein feeds grow faster than demand growth for grains. And so if you have these two situations, one in which, you have a market for soybeans that are still heavily reliant on foreign supplies, that means factors like the pace of imports, trade, tariffs, and freight are going to matter a lot more for soybean prices. If you look at corn, domestic production is really going to be the primary driver. And then from a supply perspective, we expect to see poultry lead the growth in organic demand. And with that, we expect to see meal demand grow faster than grain demand. And so I think this creates a situation in which, you have more room for soybean prices to remain supported over grain prices just by virtue of how demand and supply in these two markets are diverging.
Well, Ryan, another really insightful report with some really good information for people to work off of. Really appreciate your time, and thanks everybody for listening. Tune in next month for the Back to the Roots and Mercaris market update. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Brian.